Well, today I want to have a conversation about C0 4-stars. This is a thought I had recently on a live stream, mostly related to the fact that Fischl, in case you don't know, is like one of the most relevant 4-stars in Genshin. And despite that, it's been over a year since she reran. Like, the last time Fischl got a rerun was on Nuvilette's first banner, which is bonkers to me. I've long since said Genshin has had a pretty big problem that just gets worse and worse over time as far as acquiring 4-stars. The best recent example I can say for this is that I went for C6 Kaveh when he got his rerun banner, and to get 4 copies of Kaveh, I got 3 5-stars. And my point with this, I think there is relevance to have a conversation in how relevant different 4-stars are at C0. So yeah, I'm stooping to the level of making a tier list video, but the point of the tier list is to serve as a general framework for understanding the concept and the discussion at hand, which is like the problem of 4-stars design in this game and how there's no guarantee you're ever going to get a C6, especially if you're a player that's like starting today. It's a thing that I think is important to keep in mind whenever we're talking to each other on a communal level, right? Like if someone is asking for advice on how to use Amber, keeping in mind that some people are just never going to get anything past C0 Amber is kind of important. This is going to be my opinions and experiences playing this game on multiple different accounts over the last few years, and I'm trying to extrapolate out to a larger perspective, right? You don't have to agree with every single specific thing, but feel free to jump in the comments if you have further nuanced thoughts or something I missed. This is not like a characters you should pull for tier list. This is how functional are these characters at C0, and are they actually a relevant character? It's a wishy-washy tier list on purpose, right? Because we're having a conversation. Amber, obviously not there. Amber, I think for her to be fun, wants C2. I don't know, she has some burst support utility at C0, so at best she's in B tier. But personally, I think for her to like actually be a fun unit, like a Baron Bunny Bomber playstyle, basically is C2 at minimum, but probably C4. She needs constellations and has other problems, I'd say. Barbara has the advantage of being a Hydra unit, and her constellations are kind of garbage. C2 decreases her cooldown of her skill, so, you know, she goes, like, I think 25 seconds and then 20-second burst cooldown. So, like, she can be a relevant healer for Farina, because this is a team-wide heal. And then her ability to apply some Hydra with her ring from off-field, as long as you hug some enemies, or use her as an on-field doing normal and charge attacks to apply Hydra, is relevant. And her constellations don't really do that much for her. She's actually an A tier C0 4-star. She can be very useful and functional at C0, not constellation reliant. You're probably never going to feel the need to pull constellations on her, and Hydro is useful. Beidou, she is kind of constellation reliant. I do like Beidou, but this C2 is kind of important. I'm going to put her in B tier for that reason. And the Bennett. Now, you might say Bennett is an obvious S tier, mostly because Hoyoverse does not want to release literally any other attack buffer in the game for some reason, other than Chevreuse. Means that I think his C1's kind of important, so I don't know if I'm actually going to place him in S tier. He is a functional unit at C0, definitely, but the value you gain from C1 and C5 in particular, I would say. I also think C6 is very, very fun. Benny is a 4-star unit that is potentially worth pulling constellations for. Quite frankly, he is probably the most relevant 4-star in the game, so I kind of want to put him here, but I also think, I don't know. I think because Bennett is in the Paimon's bargain shop, though, and therefore C1 is easier to get on him than it is for many other 4-stars in the game, he deserves to be in that tier. Candace. I really like Candace's kit. We don't need to go in depth on it. Candace has this C1. This increases her burst duration by 3 seconds, which is both for her Hydro Infusion as well as her normal attack damage bonus. Candace C6 is relevant for Arlecchino. That's what I use her a lot in. Non-C6 Candace is also relevant for Mualani nowadays. I don't think this character has a functional kit without C1, quite frankly. 9 seconds of burst up time in her base kit is just stupid, in my opinion. And her niche nature makes her, I think, she's a solid B tier. Charlotte, she's a team-wide healer. She's also never had a rerun, by the way. She released on Farina's banner over a year ago. Welcome to the point of this video. Her constellations basically just reduce her energy needs and make her a little bit better of a healer. Healers that do nothing else other than heal is not that relevant. So, like, she's not a super relevant character, but the nature of Farina existing in particular means healers have significant relevance regardless. She has front-loaded burst cryo application potential that can like enable you to get melts on Diluc skill I've seen. Niche utility, but like it's all things that she has a functional C0 kit. She's actually good and useful at C0. Doesn't mean you need to build her, it just depends on your healer situation. Chivalrous. Straight into S tier. I feel like there's some people that might feel like, oh, you know, C6 60% damage bonus. No. I really don't feel like going in depth. You can watch the last year's worth of videos, which have used this character to varying degrees or another. The important thing to keep in mind is, yes, 60% damage bonus can be good. Like, her base kit components of buffing, right? These passives are far more important than the damage bonus from C6. Far more. The vast majority of the buffing, even if you have C6 Chevreuse, the vast majority of the buffing that she does is in her passives, not in her C6. This character is extremely functional and is quite frankly the best 4-star they have released since version 1.0. Her only real downside is that it takes investment into your Electro and Pyro crit DPSs to get true value out of her. Anyways, I don't know how much of that spiel I'm going to leave in for Chevreuse. She straight up deserves S tier. Chungus, his constellations are mostly focused on making him be able to do more damage. C2 is interesting because of the cooldown reduction. I don't think he is so I'm going to put him in B category. Kale has being a Dendro character going for her. Her main value is in her bursts front-loaded Dendro application. Her C4 gives a team-wide EM buff. Okay, honestly, because of other Dendro characters that are more relevant than her at C0, I don't think she deserves A category. But yeah, I think she belongs with Amber, and hey, they're friends, that's good. Diona. Quite frankly, I think this character needs C6 to be relevant. In case you are unfamiliar with her kit, essentially she is both a shielder and a healer. Her shield is not very strong, and her healing is not very strong either. Like, she's not a great healer for Frina. So she has niche value with this buff, though. A 200 elemental mastery buff to increase your reaction damage is significant. There's so many options for, you know, cryo defensive units in the game at this point. Like, why would you bother with her unless you have C6? Dori has some interesting shenanigan potential with constellations, which makes me inclined to put her here. Her kit has really weird niche mechanics to it, but she has various problems that make her not particularly relevant. I really feel like they should have just made her do a team-wide heal in her base kit, and suddenly she would have been relevant because of Freena's existence, but she doesn't, so... Oh, it's Farazan. This is an easy one. Yep. Let's say you're going to play Wanderer, right? You're a pure crit Anemo DPS. The biggest difference to your experience playing Wanderer in the hard content of this game is going to be whether or not you have this constellation, and she has very severe problems in how you can use her without this C6 for how like she was intended to be used as like an off-field supportive buffing unit for Anemo damage, right? So yeah, I would say the only asterisk with this is like in this category if you want to do DPS Farazan. Fischl, really kind of want to put her at S tier. I think she has higher potential staying power than even Xiangling does, just because I suspect we're going to get more off-field pyro options in the future. She does gain meaningfully from having C6, so that makes me torn between whether or not she actually deserves S tier or not, essentially. But the importance of having compelling off-field damage dealing options in the game and having compelling ways to do a bunch of elemental application and how Fischl can trivialize a lot of situations by shredding through enemy shields, and that's how Mihoyo designs a lot of the content. So I think she deserves S tier. Even at C0, she is a very useful character. I honestly feel like Xiangling C0 is a worse experience than Fischl C0 as far as comparing constellations of those two characters. Fremine is a weird mixed cryo physical DPS. I think he has a very cool kit, but quite frankly, he doesn't start to do compelling damage until he has constellations. So like if you're going to play him, you want constellations. It's not technically a dysfunctional kit at C0. It's just a very weak kit. So I think Fremine will be in this tier. Gaming is also not a particularly strong unit at C0, but he is much stronger at C6. He has the strength of being a pyro unit though. I think he deserves A tier. He is functional and useful at C0 for being a pyro DPS option, but it's very possible as soon as you pull for like a 5-star pyro DPS, you won't really ever have a reason to play him again unless you just want to play him. He is not a unit that's magically going to be super strong on his own right, is basically what it is. But I'm comfortable placing him in this tier. Goro. Plap. Kachina. You know what? She actually deserves A tier. Why? Because she is good and functional at C0 just because the artifact set in Outland exists, right? You can get 40% damage bonus for Pyro, Hydro, Cryo, or Electro, whatever crystallized reaction is triggered. Damage buffing is valuable. Since her damage is irrelevant, you can build her for Elemental Mastery, and your crystallized shields can be like a 5000 HP shield, which is definitely not nothing. Her main problem is that as soon as you get into like the 5-star buffers kind of thing, you're going to quickly reach the point where Kachina is not relevant. But it's regardless of her constellations. Her constellations just basically make her do more damage. But she does 0 damage. So like doubling her damage with C6, you're doing 0 times 2. 0 times 2 is 0. So like her constellations are irrelevant, I'm sorry. Kaya. C2 is weird. In AoE situations, it extends his burst duration so you can get meaningfully more damage out of him. Realistically, I am also kind of of the opinion that C6 is where he actually starts to be relevant because he's the best cryo player in the game at C6. With just him as a cryo unit on the team, he can enable Arlecchino to melt. But a C6 of Kaya, like you can only get this from Standard Banner and in the Paimon shop, so it might take you 3 years literally to get. I don't know, but he's technically not dysfunctional without C6, like he can be an off-field DPS, so maybe he actually technically belongs in here. You know what? I'll leave him here. I'll be nice to him. Kaveh. Having gone for Kaveh C6 myself, I was surprised how little I noticed the difference. I thought it would be a better constellation than it was. He's not good at C0. He is technically functional at C0 for what his kit was made to do. I recently made a video doing Shatterbloom Kaveh, and it's better than you probably would expect. None of his constellations really do that much. So you know what? He actually gets to be, he's a functional C0 4-star. He gets to be in this category. But he's definitely not good, so he's not going up here. Cat. As much as I like Kirara, and I have had fun DPSing Kirara pre-C4, I think her actual intended relevance is as, a defensive shield unit. The main problem I have with her as a defensive shield unit is that she doesn't do any off-field Dendro until C4. So like if you wanted her to be like your off-field Dendro for enabling your Fischl to aggravate or whatever, but some teams can like swap to her often enough that it's not a problem. So she's a weird one. It really depends on the team how much you would care about C4 in particular for the off-field Dendro. Otherwise her constellations aren't insane. I think she's ultimately a fairly niche Dendro unit. But I think I'll push her up to good and useful at C0 though, and that's simply because people value shielders. Having defensive options is nice. It's a quality of life experience, because even if you don't play in Abyss, you might want a character that can keep you alive, and she has a relevant element that can do things that are important for reaction triggering. Sara. Yep. Sara is similar to Goro, quite frankly, in my mind, in that even with her C6, I don't like her that much. And without her C6, she's basically useless. The buff that she gives without C6 is just not relevant enough because of other options that you have for team building in the game. Now, Kuki gets some value from C2 to give her full uptime on her Electro Ring for triggering Hyper Blooms, which makes me kind of not want to put her at S tier. But also her burst can mitigate that downtime if you play well. So you know what? No, I think Kuki, the relevance of Hyper Bloom and her being a little bit of a defensive focus unit, especially considering there's a lot of players in the game who aren't going to necessarily need that few seconds of additional uptime for, like, it doesn't matter for Overworld, right? We'll leave her there though. It's interesting we only have Electro and Pyro 4-stars in this category. That either shows a heavy bias on my part or a heavy bias on Mahoyo's part. Layla. I know some people would probably place her in A tier. I don't think she makes sense to be put in this tier, but she's technically a functional C0 defensive unit, so she can stay in this tier. Also, C1 makes her shield stronger, and a lot of people might feel like they want that. This is energy refunding. C4 gives her a buff that makes her a bit more interesting to actually consider using. The relevance of C1 at minimum, I think, makes her solidly in this tier. Lisa. I just made a video about Lisa. Personally, I kind of feel she's in this tier. But her strongest constellation on paper, if you play her well, is C4. So solidly in this tier. Lynette is a functional C0 Anemo unit, and she is good. Why? Because Anemo is strong. And if you don't have other options for Anemo, she is a free Anemo unit. If I recall, you unlock her by clearing like floor 4 of Abyss. She is not as strong as like Sucrose, to be clear. But everyone has Lynette, not everyone necessarily has Sucrose, right? And I think that's important to keep in mind. She can be functional and useful at C0, and her constellations don't change her kit, so she belongs here. Mika, kind of in the same category of Charlotte, where he is a team-wide cryo healer. He does less cryo application than Charlotte, but he also does his like physical normal attack speed buff. I think his heal is also a little bit better, and his energy needs are a little bit less awful. I also think for like casual overworld use, a lot of people might like Mika just for the fact that, you know, increasing physical damage. Right, like think back to when you first play Genshin. You just spam normal attacks to deal with all the things. Mika will buff you, and he'll help keep you alive. For casual overworld use, I think Mika is a surprisingly good character. In a more meta perspective, is he a good character? No. But that's not what this tier list is. This is how functional is his kit. If we're asking, is he a relevant physical buffer at C0? No, that's a different question, right? Then he is in this category. But I think he is a functional character at C0, not necessarily a meta-relevant physical buffer at C0. Ningguang. I think her C6 is kind of important for her being a compelling DPS. Oh, well, compelling DPS might be a weird term when it comes to Ningguang. She's not necessarily a compelling DPS at all. So I think I'll put her in this category to keep it simple. I do not have the most knowledge about Ningguang's like tech and how to use her properly. So feel free to jump in the comments if you have more nuanced thought about Ningguang. I imagine if you actually want to play her, you will end up feeling like you want constellations on her, is my suspicion, and that's why I think she belongs in this category. I guess you could argue that her utility as a catalyst unit, being able to use Thrilling Tales of Dragon Slayers, means she could be in this tier, but I'm going to keep her here. Noelle. I think Noelle is kind of a C6 character. Like, I have a built Noelle with her C6, and she is a fun character at C6, but she's not insanely strong. She can be your on-field healer when paired with Farina is her most notable synergy in the game right now. You play her if you like her or her playstyle for whatever reason, right? So I think she gets this tier, sorry. But I'd say she's like above the other ones. Razor Boy. So Razor has some reaction shenanigan potential because of the fact that you can have him be an infusion target in conjunction with his burst doing electro damage. So you can have, you know, pyro damage from Bennett C6 and electro damage at the same time, meaning you can trigger overloads, burgeons, hydra blooms. Razor can be built for EM and trigger all the reactions at the same time, and that's kind of a really cool thing you can do with him. His constellations mostly increase his personal talent damage, which isn't the most relevant. C4, I guess, is kind of interesting for the def decrease, but it doesn't matter for reaction damage, so yeah. It's called Thundering Fury if you want to look it up. But this doesn't really mean he is that good at C0, and that's also something that's kind of reliant on another character's C6. So, like, I don't think that means he deserves this. I think I'll put him in B tier. Rosaria. Rosaria gains some physical res shred from C6. She gets a duration extension for her burst with C2, which I'd say is kind of important, which solidly places her, I think, in this tier. If you weren't aware, her burst buffs your team crit rate based on Rosaria's own crit rate, so she can give up to a 15% crit rate buff. She might actually be my favorite cryo unit in the game right now, but I think this is where she deserves to be. Sayu is a defensive-focused Anemo unit. She can ult VV, which means she has relevance. Her C1 is technically necessary to get her burst to heal and attack at the same time. How needed is that? I don't know. I think the most fun thing you can do is on-fielding Yao Yao. She can be a weird reaction DPS. She's an Anemo healer that can use VV, but I also think, like, Jean exists, and Jean is a better Anemo healer than her, quite frankly. So, like, in the context of other Anemo 4-stars that can hold VV, or if you have Jean, I think there's not much reason to build her unless you want to do reaction shenanigans, and then she falls in this category. But if you just need a healer, VV artifact set holder and do buffing makes her more compelling, even at low constellations. So maybe here, but I think I'm going to put her here. Zelos. He is actually very, very functional at C0, although I will admit to some bias here. Sethos has a lot of tech you can do to be able to get a lot more value out of him than you might expect. He is one of my favorite characters they have released in a while, just period. But with that said, is he amazing at C0? I think the average player is probably not going to have that experience, even though he has the potential to be. So I'm gonna put him in this category, but I'm gonna put him in the top of it. Hazo, another freaking 4-star that has not rerun forever, so it's genuinely worth considering. Okay, again, like the point of this video, how much of a problem is it? I think he belongs here. His C1, I think, is kind of important to give him an extra stack so that you can get more of his big skills out with less field time requirement. But, okay, ultimately the problem is, like, he is a crit-based Anemo DPS, and that means like if you're really trying to see big numbers from him, you might want Farazan, right? Farazan C6 specifically. His own C6 is also potentially a fairly significant difference maker for the damage you will see from him. With that said, he can absolutely be a functional driver when you have other compelling forms of damage in the team that aren't just him. You don't have to play a hyper carry version of him where you're playing him like he's Wanderer, right? So like his ability to be an Anemo driver could technically put him here, but Lynette exists, so like I think he deserves to be here. Sugros, our first non-Pyro Electro S tier. The extra skill used from her early constellations are like nice potentially, but they're definitely not needed. And her C6 is not as relevant as some people make it out to be. And the fact that you don't really have to even use Sukros's burst for her to be a very relevant character, she does a significant EM buff. Like this character has situations where she is stronger than Kazuha. Is basically the important takeaway, and she can very much be an account changer. She deserves to be in this tier. Tomers. I think he kind of needs his early constellations, even his C4 is nice for his energy needs, but his early constellations improve his uptime, so I'm going to put him here. Xiangling. Obviously Xiangling is a very strong character, you know, there's the Xiangling copy pasta meme, we never escape Xiangling. Quite frankly, she is going to become a little bit less relevant, I think, as time goes on, if you end up having more off-field pyro options into the future. Like, for what it's worth, I have a very invested account, and I don't use Xiangling very often. I have experienced firsthand the gap between Xiangling C4 and Xiangling not C4. Notably, I played for quite a while on an account with a Xiangling C0. And things like the Hydro Tulpa, for example, she is very good against the Hydro Tulpa. But without a Xiangling C4, she is noticeably worse, right? Like, it was very obvious. The first copy of Xiangling is free, and she is in the Paimon shop, so her C4 is not necessarily as hard to get as a C4 of, you know, the Chevreuse or whatever. And she usually gets reran a lot, but I don't know, there's no guarantee. Maybe she won't get reran for a year, right? So, like, I'm not going to put her in this tier, because I wouldn't count it as that bad of a problem. I'm going to put her in this tier on the logic of C4 for her is kind of more like C2 for other characters, if you plan around the Paimon shop at worst case. You could easily argue she belongs in this tier. I don't like how much of a gap there is between her C4 and not her C4 in my own experience. The account I played with her at C0, I had an Engulfing Lightning for her and an extremely strong build. And with her C0, she felt way worse than a really underwhelming build did on my main account. So that's why I think she deserves this category. Xingqiu, by nature of like being the most compelling Hydro 4-star in the game, you would think deserves this category. The same account that I had problems with Xiangling on, I have had problems with not having Xingqiu C2. It increases his duration on his burst by 3 seconds. That's what enables you to have more flexibility to like start a rotation with Xingqiu EQ. So because of that, I don't know if he actually deserves this, but he is a leeway 4-star, also in the Paimon shop, and Hydro is extremely relevant. If there were more compelling Hydro off-fielders in the game that were 4-stars, I would say he'd get pushed to here. Also, he gains a lot of damage from C6. Like you know, he gains meaningful value from it. So there's some discourse to be had as far as like where Xingqiu belongs is my point. But the importance of Hydro means I think I'm going to put him here. Xinyan, does this one even matter to anyone? I mean, you know what? Her most interesting constellation is her C6. It is similar to C6 Noelle, where it converts its defense to some charge attack, normal attack damage bonus, if I recall. And that's, I think, where she becomes a more interesting DPS unit. So I don't know. If you have nuanced thoughts about Xinyan, you can feel free to jump in the comments and disagree, but I'm going to place her here. I'm sorry. Yanfei. She's a little bit similar to Gaming in that she is a Pyro DPS, which is a very significant strength going for her. She has interesting constellations like her C4, makes her the ability to be a weird shielder. And C6 is going to be a meaningful difference maker to the experience of probably her being a compelling DPS. She is functional at C0, I think, but it has some potential constellation relevance. So, blap. Yao. Dendro healer. In fact, like the best healer in the game, but she has some field time requirements. If you have Farina and have need for doing Dendro things with Farina, because that is obviously very relevant, Hydro plus Dendro does good things. Yao very well, I think, belongs in this tier. But if you have Baiju, then that kind of invalidates some of the potential reason to put her in this category. But that's a 5-star, right? I think she belongs in this category for being very functional and a very good character at C0. Yunjin, unfortunately, kind of is screwed over by her energy problems more than anything, and her constellations do not fix that. She can, of course, be like a Yoimiya buffer, So I think, I don't know, I think I'll put her in this tier. Auroron, I believe, deserves this tier. He actually competes with Fischl, even at C0, quite frankly. And in fact, I think because of the Natlan artifact set, I have not done a direct comparison yet with a C0 Auroron versus a C0 Fischl. I think he might be better than Fischl as far as C0 versus C0 goes. The conjunction of the artifact set damage bonus plus the application and damage that he can deal is meaningful. He doesn't just replace Fischl outright, to be clear. One of the notable things about him is that you can pair him with Fischl, but he's also reliant on the Hydra units you have on your account, so his strength is a little bit dependent on the other options you have. I don't have his C6 on any account, and I found him to be a very, very compelling character, and I like using him a lot. And last, there's a character coming out next patch. I have done some wonderful art. Lanyan, this character was announced already, so I figured I'd put her in the list. I'm not going to go in-depth on her kit here, but I actually think she deserves this tier. This could change though. I haven't actually used this character, but she is an Anemo unit. She can use VV. She has defensive utility, but we don't need to get into the weeds of why exactly right now. I don't think she's quite as relevant as Sucrose or anything. So there you have it. This is my ranking of the 4 stars and how functional they are at C0. Honestly, I think this is not as bad as I expected it was going to look. And to be clear, this group is a problem too. Like the majority of 4 stars in the game, to be clear, have, I'd say, problems in their viable utility with or without constellations. So I don't know what the end conclusion is other than I hope Mihoyo improves the 4-star acquisition problem. But if they keep on releasing units like Auroron that have, you know, compelling use cases in their C0 kit as a 4-star, well then I don't think it's as big of an issue. If these characters can be very functional without their constellations, then the acquisition issue isn't as much of a problem, although it is still like very RNG based. You could spend 100 pulls and not get a single copy of Hazo, right? But anyways, let me know if you want to see more tier list videos, I guess. My hope was that this one was somewhat informative and could be like a framework to have as far as how we think about character kits in Genshin. But I don't know, like, subscribe.